Oh.
Mom!
Hello and welcome to Let's Get Political. Let's get political. Let's get into politics. Let me hear your ballot talk. Your ballot talk.
Oh, ballot.
Hey everybody, I'm Maebe A girl.
And I'm Izzy A.
And we are here at the Mom Podcast booth at DragCon 2022. And we are ready to talk politics.
Are you?
I am.
Okay, good, because that's required.
So a little bit about us. My name is Maebe A girl. I am a Silver Lake neighborhood councilwoman. I'm the first drag queen ever elected to public office in the United States of America. I'm currently serving my second term, and I'm also running for Congress right here in Los Angeles for California District 30. Izzy, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yes, a little bit about myself.
And there's that. So, a question for you is, do you think that drag is inherently political?
No. Actually, no, I'm kidding. It's obviously political. I mean, I think just being your authentic self in America right now, as shocking as it is political, you know? And I think the idea that some people's authentic selves are off limits, not allowed, restricted, denied, what's not political about that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say to the same question?
I agree with you. I think drag is both inherently a social statement and a political statement. And even if you're not meaning for it to be a social or political statement, just the simple act of public gender nonconformity is in and of itself inherently political. So whether or not you're trying to make a political statement in your drag, you are.
Yeah. I always think about like the first experiences in drag and how it all like ended up affecting people's reactions. You know, my family, people that were friends and are friends, some of them were, you know, just the way that they reacted to the idea of what drag means. I think that kind of shows you the political nature of drag, is that the idea that you can just put on clothing and that has something to say beyond what you're actually physically intending to say or actually saying. I mean, that's political in its nature. Political is about what people think, what people feel, and what people say. And that's, I mean, not to get into semantics, but I just did. So, you know.
No, I totally agree with you because, you know, when you think about it, it is kind of stupid that just the idea of going out in a certain look because it's gender nonconforming, what it really speaks to is the idea of how we're so bound by the patriarchy and this certain set of rules that are meant for men, a certain set of rules that are meant for women, when gender is not a binary whatsoever. You know, it completely leaves out non-binary people who are all across the spectrum. But in some ways, I think it's sad that it has to be a political and social statement to go out and drag.
Yeah.
When, you know, for a lot of people, drag is just fun. But to other people, you know, they view it in a certain way. And I think one of the things that bothers me is, you know, this misconception about drag that, it's like it's a sexual thing, or, you know, it's something that, you know, shouldn't be for, you know, for kids or for youth, or, oh, we don't want our kids seeing that. Well, why not? What does that actually speak to? Does that mean you're afraid of your kids, you know, becoming queer or trans?
That's the messaging. That's the inherent messaging. And I think also that's a really good point is the idea of what should our kids see, that we're seeing that be weaponized and politicized right now. The idea that, okay, your identity, your very existence is teaching, coaching, training children instead of inspiring. And when I think about my childhood experiences, when I recall actually seeing the first, I'm so young, but I was oddly around for Will and Grace. You know, I mean, those kinds of early experiences where I remember watching that in my basement and I was ashamed and watching it, and it felt like a secret. And the idea that I could see something reflected out there, that was solace, that was peace, that was safety. And I think the idea that the language there of like, our kids shouldn't be seeing this, I think that's something that we're seeing and hearing a lot of right now, because kids are innocent. I mean, it's almost really cruel that we're like using their own existence for a political agenda. And I think that's something that happens And it's happening a lot right now. I mean, the idea that all these anti-queer bills, all these anti-trans bills, critical race theory. I mean, there's so many things in, I know we're going all the way in, but I feel like that kind of stuff, it's like that language, they're not going into, they're not training, they're not coaching. It's showing people that you're not alone. And I think what's not political about that? I mean, our identity is political because it's made to be, you know?
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. Our identities as queer people should not be politicized, but they are literally being politicized in our current governmental situation, from city governments to state governments to the federal government. And what you said about, watching Will and Grace growing up and how that was kind of your secret, for me, it was watching Queer as Folk after my parents went to bed. And I'm sure you have that memory of like holding your finger on like the change button on the remote, just in case somebody walks in, so you can quickly change and be like, oh, I was watching late night cartoons. But ultimately, it really speaks to this idea of how visibility and representation matters in all aspects, but especially when it comes to media. When you are a young person just discovering who you are and trying to figure yourself out, when you don't see anybody depicted in the media that is like you, it makes you feel abnormal. It makes you feel othered, and it makes it feel like you're wrong.
Yeah, and that's why those things are internalized, and that's why, the queer population faces higher stigma, obviously, but also higher rates of mental illness, higher rates of just in terms of the social expectation. We don't know our way around. It's not modeled for us. We don't see that. And that's really why I'm so inspired by your campaign. And I'm curious about what got you into politics. How did you find yourself where you sit right now on this couch for Mom?
From Mom Podcast.
By the way, your purse, very mom.
Very mom.
Couch,
yours is
so
also very mom. Mine's a little bit more mom, though.
Mine's a mini mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's young mom. Very young,
But back to your question about me. I have to say, actually, Izzy, you're one of the people that initially really inspired me to get into politics. You have always been political. We've known each other for almost getting close to 20 years without aging ourselves.
We met when we were -4.
We're 16. No, we actually met when we were teenagers working at Banana Republic on the flagship on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And you really inspired me with how politically knowledgeable you were at the time. And you really inspired me to, look into my viewpoints and figure out, what do I want to see in the world in terms of a political sphere? What actually literally got me into politics, though, was, the Trump administration. Believe it or not, I think that a lot of folks were, in a weird way, awakened to the need to get politically involved after Trump was elected back in 2016.
Quick question. Was your outfit inspired by Trump?
Absolutely not.
It was not. Orange.
It is a lot of orange. You're right.
Lots of orange.
I just wanted to be warm.
Oh my gosh. But speaking of, there's nothing colder than that man. So let's talk about that. That moment. I mean, a lot of times I think the idea of single issue voters is like, it has a negative connotation. Like, oh, you only care about one thing. That's all that matters. That's what drives you to fight and to be political. But when I think about even what you're discussing, I don't think single issue voting it can sometimes be that gateway drug to being a political person. Like, I think about my experiences, and when you're talking about this, it's like, okay, there's something that triggers you, that activates you to be political, to want to get involved. So what was that moment? Was that the Trump campaign?
I think that was part of it. It was more that it was kind of a culmination of that. But you're right. A lot of people do initially get involved in politics because they are affected by a single issue. And oftentimes it's an issue that personally affects them or personally affects their family or their loved ones. And, so I think it's, pretty obvious that for somebody who is queer, that they would be interested in queer issues and the effects that politics have on queer visibility, queer representation, queer rights. But for me, I was really stunned that Trump won the election in 2016. I still can't get over it. And it was, over 5 years ago now. But I think one of the silver linings, I think one of the silver linings of the Trump election was the fact that it did really invigorate and empower a lot of people to want to get involved and to say, okay, now I'm almost forced to get involved to protect my rights, to protect the rights of my friends, my loved ones, my neighbors, and even people that I don't know who are in a similar situation as me. So for me, I started doing a lot of drag numbers that were politically themed. I started doing a lot of impersonations of some of the villains in the Trump administration.
Name them.
I will name them: Kellyanne Conway, Melania Trump, Ivanka Trump, all of them. And Betsy DeVos, can't forget about her. But
Such
the thing
smart
is,
lady.
you know, when I would do these impersonations, it was obviously not to praise these characters, but to satirize them and to also let folks know about some of the atrocities that administration was carrying out. And, the thing is, for folks like us who are politically aware, follow politics, I think we sometimes take for granted the fact that not everybody does. People kind of just carry through their lives thinking, okay, our elected representatives will take care of this.
For us.
When it's absolutely not the case. You have to demand that your political reps are looking out for you.
I mean, if anything is more salient than that, it's that message right now. I mean, the idea that if you're not active in your political sphere, your voice is not being heard. And that's idea. I think, we're right on the precipice of the primary elections. And I think that's something that is historically not something that draws people to the polls. It's almost like, I'll show up when it really matters. And I think that's, I speak also from my own experiences, is like that idea of I got rallied to get involved by what was happening out there when it felt desperate and necessary. But I think, I have some statistics. We have a really great research team, Google.com.
Google.
And the California general elections in 2020, 74.6% of registered voters voted, okay? The primaries, only 34.3% voted. So that means a third of registered voters. I mean, that's not even going into who's allowed to be registered, who's allowed to access the polls, all of those barriers that exist in terms of access. But the people that are actually able to go, able to register, and able to vote on the day that is granted to them to vote, which is not a national holiday. But so that idea, it's like, why do primaries matter? Why is it so hard for people to feel like this is part of the process?
I would love to answer that question.
Do it.
So, first of all, you talked about the difference between folks voting in a general election versus a primary election. There's also a big difference of folks voting in presidential elections versus midterm elections.
Yes. So it's like a double whammy now.
It's a double whammy. So probably the most represented, the least turnout that you're going to see for any major election is going to be a primary election for a midterm year.
Which is when?
Which is June 7th, 2022, here in California. It's going to vary state by state, but here in California, our primary is June 7th. And I want to stress how important it is to vote in the primary election, because that is really the moment that you get to speak your voice and say, this is who I want to be my representative. This is who I want to see in office. If you wait until the general election, you are essentially giving up your vote of who you think it should be and just going with, okay, well, these are my two choices. Once again, I'm going to pick the lesser of two evils. I'm so sick of the let's vote blue no matter who mentality.
Yeah.
Because that is what has kept us in the status quo. That is what has kept us with the same old year in, year out. And we keep on being disappointed by our elected representatives when the fact of the matter is we are the ones that elect our representatives. And if we actually are starting to vote in primary elections, when there's a pool of candidates, you can have a voice.
Your voice almost is more important in those moments, because by the time it gets to the general, it's often whittled down to two, if not just one in your party representation. So actually the primaries are more critical in the sense that you get to have a say in who gets it to the final moment. And especially in America, we don't have a truly representative democracy. So if you get 49% of the votes, you get 0% of the seats. So that is why the primary is important, because this is our time to actually figure out who's going to be that person that's a two-party system gets to be the representative of our voice. If California is, even if it's a majority blue, then that's actually, I think, more important that the blue actually represents you. It's not just blue for the sake of blue, as you were saying. It's what shade of blue, there's so many shades.
And even on that, I think, we talk about binaries a lot. Gender is not a binary. Politics is also not a binary, but
the world wants it to be.
The world wants it to
Yes.
be, and especially here in America, we have narrowed it down into being a binary.
Mm-hmm.
There is the Democratic Party, there's the Republican Party, and more often than not, those are the two parties that you see on your general election ballots.
Mm-hmm.
And the unfortunate thing is that as many folks probably don't want to admit, there are, a lot of folks who are Democrats are in many ways voting for the same awful things that Republicans are. And a big part of that is corporate money and corporate influence in politics.
I've got to ask you about that because you have a very interesting vantage point as the first elected drag queen to public office. You're seeing and currently running for the House of Representatives. You have a very interesting experience because not only you're the first one to get entered into that position, but you're also the first one now to be facing the world's reaction. And I wonder, what have you learned in these years since you've started running for office outside of the local representation that you currently serve on? What have you learned about that experience based on how people have responded to you? What is it like being a drag queen politician and a trans non-binary politician?
First of all, I will say money unfortunately talks, and it talks in politics. And, I've said from the beginning, we need to get big money out of politics. We need to stop allowing corporate influence in these elections, in these races. And, it's hard to win a race when you don't have a lot of money. In fact, a lot of people will look at candidates and say, oh, well, how much money have you raised for your race? And, here you've got an incumbent who's raised $13 million, but a lot of that money is coming from this really dirty resources. You're having, corporations that are weapons manufacturers, defense contractors, big oil, big pharma, making these donations to candidates when there is a catch to that. That the only reason that they are funding these elections is because those very corporations are expecting you to represent them when they get elected to office. When we should not be representing corporations, we should be representing people. So in many ways, it has been difficult running a grassroots corporate-free campaign for Congress. But I think that is really the most ethical, authentic, people-powered way to go. I'm running because I want to see people-powered policies in Congress, not corporate-powered policies in Congress. And time again, since the beginning of our nation's history, you have seen the influence of business on our government when they should be separate.
Business? It's going to be
millionaires and billionaires.
Yes, and it's going to be the same patriarchy that we started talking about that are creating these binaries, that are creating these social quote unquote norms. And I think it's so silly that so many candidates and so many representatives currently elected like to talk that the money doesn't talk. They're like, oh, okay, I care about you, while they're getting shoveled a bunch of funds. And, speaking of moguls of media, just think about even, not going to big, just keeping it small. Think about when you were a kid, when I got my allowance, as meager and minimal as it was, I wasn't going to tell my mom I was smoking weed. I wasn't going to tell her I was having a good time. I was doing great because I knew that I had to respond to her, and that's the idea is big farm, big oil, all of these corporations, the fact that they believe that it's almost insulting, honestly, that they think we're stupid enough to believe that they're not controlled by those interests,
Absolutely. And, I think about the incumbent that I'm running against. I'm running against an extremely well-known establishment corporate Democrat, Adam Schiff. And, the thing is, a lot of folks idolize Adam Schiff because of his work on the impeachment.
Because he's so hot?
No, on his work on the impeachment. And, a lot of people, because of that, think that he's progressive. But I always like to ask people, what has Schiff as your representative done beyond challenge and speak out against Trump? Because I think to be against Donald Trump is the lowest
Low
bar, the
bar.
lowest bar in politics.
Very low.
It's literally, I can't even slouch that low. And
And it's ironic she's slouching now.
I slouch.
Slouch on the couch.
But here's the thing is we need more progressive voices that are not impacted by corporate money being elected to office. You know, there are all these catchphrases and these taglines that a lot of our currently elected officials like to use, you know, universal health care, Medicare for all. But here's the thing, how can we trust somebody who owns stock in pharmaceuticals to vote and fight
Not
for...
to prioritize those.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. The same thing goes for, you know, trying to create a Green New Deal and trying to achieve environmental justice. When they're taking money from big oil and not actively fighting against those institutions, again, how can we trust that they are actually fighting for these ideals that we all not just want, but we absolutely need to be able to survive? We need, as a planet, we need environmental justice.
I mean,
you know?
that's a really good point. Like when we're talking about what are the main issues, you know, it's like a lot of people are like, what are the hot issues this year? What's trending right now? You know, I think that's a really good idea. It's like, you know, we talked a little bit about single issue voters, how sometimes that's like the gateway to get you into politics as a whole. But I did say whole. But I'm wondering, like, what do you think are the main issues right now? What are those issues that will bring people to the primary elections? Like, what's going to make you vote, you know?
You know, I actually get asked that question a lot.
You did again.
You know, what are the top 3 issues? What are the main issues? Here's the thing, you know, for somebody like me who's running on a platform that includes universal health care, housing for all, education for all, environmental justice, racial justice, LGBTQIA rights, alleviating homelessness, and staying out of war. Those are all intersectional issues. They are not in and of themselves individual issues. One affects the other in one way or another.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that I think that's a little bit of the notion of how it's been weaponized. Like the idea that you can pick one issue, pull it apart from everything else that exists under the umbrella. It's a lie. You know, I mean, we're all within one society. There's all, like, politics governs every asset. So why would one issue not be connected to another? You did mention a few issues. I think it's important we talk about some of those. You know, environmental justice.
I would love to talk about that. And you know what? That's the thing. Environmental justice is LGBTQIA justice, is racial justice.
Yes.
Healthcare justice is LGBTQIA justice, is racial justice. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
And, you know, but when it comes down to it, they are all individual issues, even though they're all connected. You know, healthcare for me is a huge one. That's one of the big reasons I'm running. You know, I don't have health insurance. And
so if I punched you in the face right now,
I think
what would you do?
I would hope that Mom Podcasts would at least partially cover some of them. Does Mom Podcasts have health insurance?
What's that? That's a hard no. Yeah.
Oh, a hard no. All right, please do not punch me then.
Call Mom.
I will. But yeah, healthcare, you know, we talk about, a lot of our currently elected folks talk about how we need access to healthcare, how we need to expand access to healthcare. And that's such a joke statement, because the thing is, we actually already do have access to healthcare. Any of us could show up at the emergency room. It's, can you afford the healthcare?
Yeah. I mean, the idea that you're going to be saddled, the fact that people are gambling, do I call an ambulance to get to the hospital? Like, because the bill you're going to be saddled with. I mean, that's, we shouldn't be having to debate finances when it's a life or death situation. And even if it's not a life or death situation, like the idea that we have to even consider these issues beyond just our own existence. And that's what I think is so, these taglines, you know, like, are so powerful because they're sound bites, they're quick, they're easy, but it's, you know, access to healthcare. It's the system's in place. We have the system. We've proven that we can actually afford. I mean, we're funneling money into so many other places. We can afford this system to work for everybody. But unfortunately, the people that are elected, they're getting taken care of. And I think that leads really into Roe v. Wade.
Yes, because when you have healthcare, when you have housing, when you have education, when you have security, you forget about the fact that a very large number of people who are already marginalized, who are already disenfranchised, don't have that. You had brought up this idea of, oh, do I call an ambulance? This happened to my friend Hybrid, who a few months ago. Hybrid was on her way to my apartment, driving one of those wheel scooters, and flipped over the handlebars, totally crushed her wrist, was totally disoriented, bloody. And rather than calling an ambulance, she walked to my apartment and we called an Uber to go to the hospital because it's just too expensive to call an ambulance.
And Uber's expensive.
And they were surging, and it was still cheaper than an ambulance.
Her wrist was surging. Uber was surging.
Everything was surging.
My anger is surging the more we talk about this.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And on a different note, even folks who do have health insurance don't always have the access to the kind of care that they need. And that's especially true when it comes to queer people, to trans people. I have a trans friend who is trying to get top surgery, and he has health insurance. He had to reach out to 10 different doctors. None of them are able to provide that kind of service.
Yeah.
None of them are able to do that. So all the doctors that are in network for that person can't do the procedure. So when it comes down to it, queer and trans people actually don't have a lot of access to healthcare, even if you have health insurance, even if you can afford health insurance.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a really good point, which is that these issues aren't just momentary issues. Like the idea of, having to live in the world where you're not able to authentically live as you are. And that it's not just a one thing. I need to get this doctor to approve me to get into surgery to make this reality true. How long is that wait? How many days are you expending dealing with bigotry, with stigma, with hate, with assault? I mean, so that it's like, just sit tight for a little bit. You'll get it figured out. It's really a place of privilege to say, yeah, okay, maybe you're whoever's speaking that sentiment, the idea of, okay, I have a cough and a cold, I can sit through this. I mean, most of them also have access to healthcare pretty quickly. I mean, the idea that it's just brushed under the rug, that the daily lived experience of queer individuals, and that's why I think all of these issues affect queer people. That's why here at RuPaul's DragCon, Mom Media we're grateful that they've allowed us to have this conversation because it is so critical. If you are queer, if you are not queer, if you know someone who is queer, which you fucking do.
You do.
This is important, because, I mean, I know I just touched on it, but right now, Roe v. Wade is obviously
Roe v. Wade.
Hottest issue, and I don't mean that in a stupid minimizing
but
way.
that's the current topic of conversation because it's something that it's going to affect a lot of people.
And it's going to lead to more than just that. I mean,
exactly.
People are talking about this one issue, and that's the idea that we were just talking about.
One issue isn't
one solo singular issue. It leads into others, and they're all interconnected.
Beyond that, we were talking about earlier how if Roe v. Wade
the precedent
if it gets overturned, the precedent is going to allow queer people to be stripped of their rights. I think a lot of folks who are younger queer people, I'm so grateful that they got to grow up in a world where gay marriage is legal and where you can openly be a queer person in public. What I think some of those folks may not always realize is that these rights are fairly new.
Yeah.
These rights are fairly new, and they could easily be stripped away. Roe v. Wade has been in effect for almost 50 years, and here we see it's about to be overturned.
Yeah.
So do not take any of your rights for granted, ever, ever.
The idea that a federal protection supersedes anything, we're witnessing right now how that federal protection it's not written into law. So the idea that one decision can overturn, I mean, when we think about housing, when we think about jobs, I mean, your identity as a queer person is in the balance. Like if this Supreme Court decision the leak proves to be a full-blown flood, if it turns out to be true, that sets the precedent for all of these rights that we've worked so hard to get over decades. to be stripped away. You know, I mean, then it goes to the state, and we even see 13 states right now have trigger bans. So the second that decision's put down, 13 states will immediately outlaw abortion to an extreme extent.
Immediately.
That's even the conversation about it is the way that they talk about it. It's so black and white, and the idea that it's like they're speaking for you. So why don't you speak for yourself? They're telling you what we think abortion means. Why isn't this something we get to voice? And when do we get to voice it? It's in these elections. It's in this primary election.
Exactly.
Which is June
7th. And, you know, if you're somebody who thinks, oh, we're in the midst of having our queer rights overturned, it's about to happen. No, honey, it's already happening. It's already happening. You know, for me, one of the reasons that I decided to run for higher office is because, first of all, how high? U.S. federal government. I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives to represent California District 30. And one of the reasons that I'm doing that, one of the many reasons, is because of the fact that there has never, ever been a federally elected trans or non-binary person elected to our federal government. Yet here we have all of these laws being instituted across the United States that are taking away queer and trans rights. 2021 was a landmark year in terms of anti-queer legislation. 191 anti-LGBTQIA bills. 191 anti-LGBTQIA bills were introduced at state levels all across the U.S. This was all of 2021. We're only, into May of 2022? And this year, that number has already been surpassed. There's already been over 230 anti-LGBTQ bills moving through states. Most of those, more than half of those, specifically affecting trans people. You know, trans people, queer people, we just want to exist in our society. We just want to we don't want special rights. We want to have the same rights as everybody else to exist as we are. We want to use the bathroom. We want to play sports. We want to have gender affirming healthcare. And yet to some conservative Republicans, they view that as us wanting special rights. Get the hell out of here.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that they get to say that they get to name the language around it. That's why it's so important to have your voice be heard, to speak up, to vote, because the idea is, you know what you feel, you know, like, you know how you feel about the issues, but we're picking someone to speak on your behalf. And I think that's really what's so groundbreaking is, and also shocking that you are in this position you are, where you're like, I am setting a precedent for being the first.
It was so bizarre. When I got elected to my local position here in Los Angeles, when I got elected to the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council in 2019, I wasn't running to be the first drag queen ever elected. I didn't find out until afterwards, until it was, I read it in an article that I was the first drag queen ever elected. And it actually shocked me because, again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, because I read.
So, okay, speaking of representation, should we bring some people? You know, I see a familiar face out there.
I would love that. I would love that. Should we bring somebody up, ask them a few questions
Let's
about...
do it. How about this beautiful lady over here?
Can we get Swade up here?
Come on, Swade.
Hey, Swade. Come sit on the couch with us between our mom bags.
Oh, my gosh. You look beautiful.
Hello.
Make yourself comfy.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but we're not. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Swade.
Hello. Hey, Swade.
So excited to be here.
Yes. Okay, so Swade, are you a political person? I'm curious.
I'm aware. I'm politically aware, yes.
Okay, and what brings you into that awareness? Like, what do you feel is important right now? What's making you feel charged and political right now?
Definitely just diversity, equity, and inclusion all together. I actually am the recruiting coordinator in my day job, and something that's like really important to me is diversity and making sure that we are reflective of our clients, and we are an environment of belonging.
Yes.
So, yes.
I mean, I think that's kind of what is being discussed, is the idea that if you don't see yourself, how are you supposed to know that you have a place?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I work in aesthetics. So it's very important that, you know, we are reflective of not just, you know, those who can afford it, but everyone who wants it.
Yeah. I just saw Band-Aids. Have you seen, like, the fact that Band-Aids have now finally become inclusive. I mean, I don't know how many shades, but also like the idea like that's a groundbreaking moment. It's pathetic, but it's also amazing.
Yes.
I mean, but it's also the idea that's exactly what you're speaking of, right?
Exactly.
Like that something as simple as that moment of putting a band-aid on your finger, healthcare.
Yeah.
Healthcare,
Yeah.
hello.
I mean, I had no idea that Band-Aids were supposed to be flesh tone.
That's
You
it.
know, growing up, I was just like, it's a Band-Aid. Like, you always had like the different colorful ones.
Oh, yeah, the cartoons.
In my mind, they just weren't supposed to be flesh tone. It wasn't until I was like much older and people were like, why don't they have like brown Band-Aids? I'm like, they are beige. Ah, good point. Yeah, I guess we should probably have some flesh tone runs. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious too. Like when you think about like we're using this Band-Aid example as like kind of a idea of representation matters. When it comes to politics, I mean, the idea that it took Band-Aids this long to get to this point. I mean, like that's obviously something that's important, but it's also an industry that exists outside of politics.
Exactly.
How important is it that politics are representative, are showing up to the table, are speaking your needs and your like individual needs, like
I mean, it's crucial. These are the people who are literally making the decisions for us. So it's just like not only do we have to make sure that the people that we are electing into these offices are reflective of not just our views, but of our community views. And, on a national scale, you just have to work together, continue to communicate, and, just understand that it's not just about us. It's about those who are coming after us. So
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you, Swade, are you registered to vote?
I am registered.
Did you get your ballot in the mail already?
I did. It came.
Yes.
It came actually like 2 days ago.
Love it.
So, yes.
So for you, what are some of the reasons that inspire you to vote? What are some of the reasons that say, hey, this is why my voice matters. This is the kind of change that I want to see in the world.
It's important because, there are a lot of things that we're trying to keep that we're losing, and there are a lot of things that we're trying to change that just have never been right.
Mm-hmm.
And it only changes by continuing to fight and continuing to vote for, the people who are saying that they're going to, and proving that they are for us.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Are there any specific things like healthcare or housing or trans rights or anything like that really says, this is one of the big reasons I need to get involved?
I mean, definitely, I would just say trans rights. Trans rights they're human rights. So it's just kind of, it starts there. Making sure that people are being treated as they are, as human beings. And, it just starts there. It starts with making sure that people are taken care of.
Absolutely. In fact, I was actually talking to Izzy about this earlier, how yesterday I saw Lindsey Graham had tweeted about Finland joining NATO and was saying how that's such a great thing because NATO fights for democracy and NATO fights for human rights. And I responded by saying, well, you know what? Abortion is a human right. Healthcare is a human
Yes.
right. Housing is a human right. Trans rights are human rights. And those aren't even guaranteed here in the U.S.
No.
And these are things that we have to change.
Yes.
And the more we talk about it, the more we get involved, the more that we fight for each other, the more we encourage each other to vote, to run, to get involved, the more of a likelihood that we're going to actually see these kinds of changes in our lifetimes. We can make these changes happen. In fact, we have to make them happen. It is up to us. It's not up to our elected officials. They are our representatives. We are
hold them
electing them
accountable.
to make those changes. But we have to want and fight for those changes. We have to get enough people involved to say, you know what? Healthcare is a human right, and we all deserve universal healthcare.
Absolutely.
And so on and so forth. And again, they're all intersectional issues.
Yes. And we live in, I traveled the world as a flight attendant, and we really do live in one of the greatest countries in the world. I mean, because of our standing, a lot of us actually don't really need that much in terms of going to the hospital. Most of us don't go to the hospital, within a year. But if we had universal health care,
It sets you back.
I mean, so many people sit around and walk around in pain and have no idea what they're doing to themselves. And it's because they're just concerned about, I can't afford this. I can't afford to be healthy.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. Like that is a honestly a tragedy and a travesty.
It shouldn't be a decision. And I think that's also the idea is, when we're talking about the results of like, what's the result of the policies we have in place? I also think like, what are the causes? When we think about like, who's more negatively impacted by these, health issues, whether like environmental justice is such a huge issue. Yeah. The fact that like people of color are going to be more affected by negative, whether that's pollution or, these bills that are being passed by these men in power and women, that the idea that they're holding the burden and then they're also charged with the responsibility to figure it out for themselves after they've been affected by it. Yes. And I think that's the idea. It's like we're trying to change something to fix the past and also to prevent it from continuing to happen.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, that's it. Yeah, we're trying to keep the past from repeating itself. We've made so much progress. We're not trying to go back. There is no going back. There's only going forward. And moving forward means voting in the people who are going to work for us and going to make the changes that are necessary so that not just us, but the people who are coming after us, the children coming after us, they are getting what they need and what they deserve. We all pay taxes and deserve a seat at the table and not settling for scraps.
100%. I think we're just about out of time. Wow, that went so quickly.
That went so fast.
The whole time we were like, oh my God, how are we going to fill up an hour? We still have so much that we wanted to talk about that we didn't even get to cover.
Planned,
Thank you so much, ladies,
for
having me.
Thank you so much, Swade. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to Mom Podcast. I'm Maebe A Girl.
And I'm Izzy A She.
And we're here with our special guest,
Swade.
Goodbye.
M. Oh. M. Mom.